Some called him a murderer. Others called him a hero. This is the true story of the father who killed his son's abuser in front of the world. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1984. The Plauché family lived a simple, middle-class life. Gary Plauché was a devoted father of 4, known around the neighborhood as friendly, hardworking, and always with a smile. He wasn't wealthy, but he was proud of what mattered most, his kids. Of all of them, his 11-year-old son Jody had become the bright light of his life. Like many parents, Gary wanted to give Jody opportunities. That's why, when a local karate instructor named Jeff Doucette offered to train Jody, the Plauchés felt lucky. Doucette was charismatic, with long hair and a soft voice that made him appear trustworthy. He wasn't just a teacher, he inserted himself into the family's life. He ate meals at their home, drove Jody to practice, and spoke about giving the boy discipline and focus. But beneath that charming mask was something sinister. Doucette was grooming Jody. At first, the signs were subtle. Doucette began spending more and more time with the boy, taking him on trips without the family. He bought Jody gifts, whispered secrets, and carefully isolated him from others. Gary, busy with work, didn't notice at first. Patricia, Jody's mother, felt uneasy but couldn't quite place why. Then, in February 1984, the nightmare struck. Jody didn't come home. He had gone off with Doucette after karate practice and vanished. The family's world collapsed overnight. Patricia and Gary called the police, and soon the FBI became involved. For days, no one knew where Jody was. News crews reported the story of the missing boy, plastering his picture across television screens and newspapers. Gary couldn't sleep. He barely ate. He spent each night staring out the window, hoping to see his son come home. Meanwhile, Doucette had taken Jody across state lines to California. For more than a week, the boy endured abuse at the hands of the man who had pretended to be his mentor. Doucette brainwashed him, telling him lies, insisting his parents didn't care. Back in Louisiana, Gary's rage grew. Each day without his son was agony. But when the FBI finally tracked down Doucette, storming into a California motel and rescuing Jody, the relief was overwhelming. Jody was alive. His nightmare, at least for now, was over. But for Gary, the nightmare had only shifted. Because while Jody was safe at home, the man who had destroyed his son's innocence was in custody and still alive. When Jeff Doucette was arrested, Baton Rouge breathed a sigh of relief. The predator was caught. But for Gary, relief gave way to a different emotion: fury. In the days after Jody's return, Gary visited him in the hospital for medical and psychological evaluations. The boy was withdrawn, his eyes haunted, speaking only in short sentences. Each time Gary tried to talk to him, he saw the pain behind his son's face. He could only imagine the details Jody would never want to share. And then came the interviews. The FBI, police, and lawyers wanted statements. They wanted Jody to relive it, to explain what Doucette had done. Gary sat in the room during one of these interviews and clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He realized something terrible. The legal system would take months, maybe years. Lawyers would argue. Trials would drag on. And Doucette, the man who had stolen his son's innocence, would sit in a cell, eating meals, waiting for his day in court. Gary's friends noticed the change in him. He had always been outgoing, quick with a joke. Now he grew quiet, withdrawn. People described his eyes as dark and hollow. His conversations were short, focused only on the case. He spent long hours alone, replaying the betrayal in his mind. In his heart, Gary knew prison wasn't enough. He imagined Doucette sitting in a courtroom smirking, maybe even daring to look at Jody again. The thought made his stomach twist. He began to plan. Gary wasn't a career criminal. He wasn't violent. But he was a father. And in his mind, fathers had one job: protect their children. Doucette had crossed a line no man should ever cross. And Gary believed there was only one way to balance the scales. When Gary learned that Doucette would soon be flown back to Baton Rouge to face charges, something inside him snapped into place. This was his chance. March 16, 1984, Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport. The local news station had been tipped off that Jeff Doucette was being flown back under police escort. Cameramen rushed to the terminal, eager to capture footage of the accused child abuser. It was supposed to be a routine prisoner transfer, but it became one of the most shocking moments ever caught on live television. Gary arrived early. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary man making a phone call at the row of public payphones. But inside his jacket was a small revolver. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't panicking. Witnesses later said he looked calm, as if he had rehearsed every moment. Around 9:30 p.m., officers escorted Doucet into the terminal. He wore handcuffs, flanked by lawmen on each side. His long hair fell around his shoulders, and he kept his head down. The TV cameras lit up, recording every step. As the group passed the payphones, Gary turned slightly. He lifted the revolver, and in one motion he pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the terminal. Doucet collapsed instantly, a single bullet tearing into his head. The officers froze, stunned. The camera kept rolling, capturing the moment in chilling clarity. "Why, Gary, why?" one officer shouted, grabbing him. Gary didn't resist. He didn't run. He simply allowed himself to be taken away, his face calm, as though the burden he had carried for weeks had finally lifted. That single gunshot fired in a crowded airport, caught live on camera, became one of the most infamous acts of revenge in American history. The footage spread across the nation within hours. News anchors replayed it again and again. The quiet father turning, the flash of the gun, the collapse of the abuser. Reactions were divided. Some saw Gary as a hero, a father who had done what the law could not. Others argued that he had taken justice into his own hands, undermining the legal system. Gary was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. But his lawyers argued something different. This wasn't premeditated murder. This was a crime of passion, the breaking point of a father who had endured unimaginable trauma. In court, the defense played the footage of Doucet's crimes, the testimony of Jody, and the agony of the family. The jury and judge saw not a cold-blooded killer, but a man driven beyond reason by love for his child. The result shocked many. Gary was convicted only of manslaughter. His sentence? 5 years probation and community service. No prison time. The judge declared that sending Gary to prison would serve no purpose. He wasn't a threat to society. He wasn't a repeat offender. He was simply a father who had snapped. The case became a national debate. Some praised the leniency. Others warned that it set a dangerous precedent. But in Baton Rouge, the majority stood by Gary. They said they would have done the same. Gary Plauché returned to his life, though he was never quite the same. He carried the weight of what he had done, but he never expressed regret. In interviews years later, when asked if he would do it again, his answer was chillingly simple. If it had been your child, you would have done the same thing. Jody, now grown, spoke openly about his father's actions. He admitted the killing shocked him, but he understood why it happened. He carried scars from Doucet's abuse, but he also carried gratitude that his father loved him enough to fight, in whatever way he could. The footage of that night at the airport remains one of the most haunting moments in true crime history. Millions have watched it on television and decades later, on the internet. A single gunshot fired by a desperate father still sparks debate. Was it justice or was it murder? For many, Gary Plauché represents the ultimate expression of parental love and rage. To others, he is a cautionary tale about letting vengeance replace the rule of law. But one thing is certain, his act of revenge will never be forgotten.